Several false starts, a couple of penalty flags. Big Ten football is back, and we are back to discuss it as we are joined by Kyle Rowland and Ashley Bostock from the Toledo Blade. And guys, it has been, to quote the Grateful Dead, a long, strange trip for the last 36 days or so, but we do have a path. And October 23rd, October 24th, Big Ten will be playing football throughout the Midwest.
Yeah, it was a 5-week odyssey with a lot of things in between that I don't think we would have expected. A lawsuit from Nebraska players, a parent-led protest at Big Ten headquarters, coaches speaking out in very, not nice terms about their conference. But here we are now. Everyone's happy and a big, loving family again, and Big Ten football is back. It's definitely, a remarkable journey. I think there'll be a lot of hurt feelings for years to come. I don't think this will be something that everyone just completely gets over. But at the end of the day, football is going to be played this year. I think it will be played successfully. I know colleges have kids on campus and all those sorts of things, so it's not identical to the NFL. But the Big Ten's plan mirrors the NFL pretty closely, and they've had tons of success with very minimal positive tests. So I expect the 8-game season to happen, and I expect a champion in the Big Ten to be crowned, and that team more than likely will be playing in the college football playoff.
And Ashley, as much as the parents' protests, the coaches speaking out, the players speaking out, as much as that may have swayed public opinion, I think the real difference maker in terms of the college university presidents and provosts and those that actually made the decision came down to the science, the fact that they were able to get rapid daily testing and get on board with that. That is what has enabled those college presidents, those chancellors to change their mind and allow this Big Ten football season to continue.
Exactly. And I think how we've seen this announcement get rolled out, that testing is maybe the biggest point. And I think it's huge, especially this time around, that this was a unanimous vote. And we know last time when they voted to postpone, it was 11-3. But, University of Michigan President Mark Schlissel put out a statement of his own saying he agrees with the decision, and that's pretty big since he's an immunologist, that he feels comfortable enough to vote the way he did and vote along with the rest of the conference. So the daily rapid testing, I think, was the biggest turning point here. The fact that these kids are going to be able to get tested every day before practice, before their games, essentially means that contact tracing is not going to be an issue, and the schools aren't going to have to waste time doing it because everybody's getting tested at the same time. And the other thing, and I think I would agree, the biggest, the other big turning point medically for this is the schools now having access to maybe some cardiac monitoring equipment that they didn't have access to prior to this vote. And they found out they were going to be able to get that this weekend when the conference was going through all these medical presentations. So definitely two big turning points, I think, medically here in order for them to allow these 14 teams to get going in just a few weeks.
And speaking of all 14 Big Ten schools have opted to play this fall season. Kyle, does that surprise you at all? Because certainly we had heard rumblings that some schools maybe weren't as interested as playing football this season as some other teams in the Big Ten were interested in playing.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm definitely 50-50 on it. There have been issues at schools. Wisconsin's currently on a pause. Rutgers has had their fair share of issues throughout the summer. But I don't know. They kind of all had to be in. I don't know what kind of message it would have sent, like to say the vote was unanimous and then to give schools the option to opt out, or even if it wouldn't have been unanimous and schools still would have opted out. I just think like the messaging there would have been bad to say that it's good enough for some schools to do it and not good enough for others. And quite frankly, I just think that most of these university leaders truly do believe that it's really safe now. I mean, like Ashley explained earlier, like the contact tracing is almost irrelevant now with the daily testing. Myocarditis becomes much less of an issue if you can catch it and there's not players, unknowingly with it playing. So I think just so much of the medical concern is diminished now with the daily testing.
Let's talk about what we're going to see on the field. It's going to be an 8-game schedule. Everybody's going to play their conference or their division foes. There are going to be a couple of crossover games. And I think maybe the headline for everybody is that the final week of the Big Ten season, everybody's going to play. Number one will play number one from the East and the West and down the line. So we are going to have perhaps Rutgers and Illinois meeting to find out who is the worst team in the Big Ten this year.
Yeah, sign me up for that.
Yeah, that's like, I would actually like actively want to go to that game, honestly, because the visual of it is just so funny. Like watching Rutgers try to prove, no, we aren't the 14th worst team in this league. Like we are number 13. Thank you very much. Like it definitely adds something, but it is like kind of comical to think about that 6 versus 6 game or that 7 versus 7 game. But there are going to be some fun storylines, I think, by the time we get to that point.
I think there's one underrated factor with the schedule, with that championship week of games. I assume the Pac-12 is not going to play. So if they don't, there's 4 power conferences and 4 spots in the playoff. I mean, if one team is going to get two of the teams and one league's left out or whatever, maybe the Big Ten could sneak in and get 2 teams. If, say, Ohio State goes undefeated and Penn State is 7-1, I mean, what if another quality win that final week against the second best team in the West, like potentially also makes them a playoff team? So I don't know. I just think that's kind of an interesting element to it.
Yeah, I think that's probably part of the reason why the Big Ten has gone this way, not only to give everybody 9 games, but also to keep hope alive, if you will, to get an at-large bid into the college football playoff. Let's talk about this calendar now. They're not going to start playing October 23rd or 24th. If there is a team that has to miss a game, there's not going to be time to make it up. College Football Playoff Committee could still put that team into the college football playoff, but there's not the window that we thought we were going to have back in that second set of schedules that came up for the Big Ten 3 days before they canceled the season. So there really isn't a whole lot of margin for error for the Big Ten. Everybody's going to play every week, and then that final week, December 19th, we're going to have all these crossover games. So they are cutting it close, and there could be situations where games just do not happen this year in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, think of the nightmare scenario of just one of the marquee games getting blocked out, like Ohio State, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and then like both those teams are undefeated. I don't know how you figure out where to go from there, but that would be a pretty big problem, I think. But I just don't see games getting canceled. Ashley can comment as well, just because of how stringent the testing is going to be. I mean, I sound like a broken record, I guess, but it just seems like they're going to be able to prevent large numbers of players being out, which I think 5% is the threshold, and that is roughly like 6, 7, 8 players, which isn't a lot. But I think once you get into this regimen and, like the week of October 24th, the first game, they will have been testing for 3 or 4 weeks by then. And I just think that the numbers are going to be, virtually 0.
Yeah. And, I know that it's not just positivity rate with the team, it's positivity rate in the community. So I guess we'll see how that plays out. But at least at Michigan, like they haven't even been close to that positivity percentage. They have not even come close to touching it so far. And they've been testing since mid-June. And last we heard, and granted, in the last 2 weeks of numbers, I don't know for sure, but they went the entire month of August without a positive test. So I think at least that program, and that's really all I can speak to in regards to positivity rate and stuff, I think they're pretty confident that that's not really going to affect them having to cancel a game, just because they haven't been spreading it amongst themselves so far this entire time. And you talk to the players, and at least at the schools that have been taking it seriously, it seems like they've kind of voluntarily put themselves in a bubble by not going out, not going to bars or restaurants. And again, in the case of Michigan, a lot of these guys are only really quote unquote hanging out with the people they live with. So I think that's done a lot to mitigate the spread already. But again, going back to this testing thing, you really can't overstate it. It just is really, really huge to know that every day you're going to have the chance to catch any positive cases. And, you hear all the time, well, testing doesn't prevent, but it does prevent other people from catching it, even if one person does.
I think the ultimate irony in all this, I mean, I don't think the Big Ten, they wish that the last 5 weeks wouldn't have happened with the negative publicity and just players uprising, all that kind of stuff. But the funny thing is that they now have by far the best plan in all of college football, basically because they messed up in the beginning. So I just think that's pretty ironic.
We've been talking a little about you want to contain the spread within the team if somebody should get infected. And I don't want to get political, but I think there are probably going to be some teams that are going to treat the quarterback and the backup quarterback, like the president and vice president, they're never going to be together, because if one guy goes down, they don't want the other guy to go down as well. So I think we've seen that a little bit with some of the postponements, is that we've seen position groups get decimated because everybody's got to quarantine. So I think that's going to be one thing to keep an eye on. It's going to test the depth of teams as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's like going to be the number one thing is, and also coaches you think about, like having a line of succession. Like I know Michigan has that. I think the plan is that Josh Gaddis and Don Brown would share duties as head coach if Jim Harbaugh were to get sick and have to quarantine. And they kind of have this literally a line of succession for if any coach were to get sick. But I know too, at least again in Ann Arbor, that there's still a mixture of in-person versus virtual meetings. And again, I think it kind of all goes back to trying to keep them out of the same room to try to avoid a position group being decimated. Because, again, you've seen it around the country. If the offensive line room gets a case of this, that's a huge deal for pretty much any team. But again, I think it goes back to testing and, still doing things virtually when possible.
Didn't think schools would need to name a designated survivor, but here we are. I think that's what makes the news about Michigan today, I don't want to steer your thunder, Ashley, so interesting, because I think backup quarterbacks, they're already way more important than people realize. And this year they could be especially so. Ohio State, if Justin Fields goes down, they go from being a national championship favorite to not even being the Big Ten East favorite, I think. There's going to be all sorts of weird things. The Big Ten, maybe less so now. But like in the SEC and ACC, some of these conferences you're hearing about, you're having guys play out of position. You're having people play, positions that they hadn't played since like midget football. So I definitely think, the potential is there for kind of chaos and kind of just fixing puzzle pieces in together.
Ashley, as Kyle just alluded to, one of the big question marks for Michigan going into this season was who would replace Shea Patterson at quarterback. And, well, today, in addition to the Big Ten announcement, we do have clarification as to what the situation at quarterback is for the Wolverines. Yeah,
it's looking like Joe Milton is going to be the starter because Dylan McCaffrey is set to opt out of the season and transfer, likely at least, and he'll have 2 years of eligibility remaining whenever he does. But I can honestly say that is an outcome I did not expect coming into my Wednesday. I thought, we might get a Big Ten announcement today, but was not ready for the Michigan quarterback battle to end this way. And Kyle and I were talking offline earlier today. The extra crazy thing about this is Michigan did not have any spring football practices. Their entire spring slate got wiped out. So there was absolutely no clarity coming into this battle. Now, granted, they've been practicing since, the season was postponed. Obviously, no contact practices. So that's still pretty big, I guess, to try to get that much clarity this quickly. But from what I heard, it sounds like Joe Milton had kind of pulled ahead in this battle, and Dylan McCaffrey has not practiced with the team in recent days. So it definitely was a shock that this all transpired as quickly as it did, especially because on September 5th, he was at the We Want to Play protest that they did in Ann Arbor. So less than 2 weeks later, he's, thinking about transferring. And by all accounts, it seems like he's going to do that and enter the transfer portal, and he's not going to be on the sidelines this fall. So we will see Joe Milton in Ann Arbor in the Big House, which I know a segment of the fan base was super excited about and has been since he got there. But again, like you said, I never expected the clarity in this quarterback battle to come this way and as suddenly as it did. And on a day when we got a news that there is going to be Big Ten football in the fall.
Meanwhile, Kyle, in Columbus, it's a different situation where earlier this week, both Wyatt Davis and Shaun Wade both declared their intention to opt out of the season. Now that there will be a season, the door is still open for both of those guys to return, and we are still waiting final word. It sounds like Wyatt Davis will be back. Shaun Wade, he wants to celebrate his birthday today before he makes his final decision.
Yeah, it's interesting how, once reality hits and the decision was actually made to come back, how minds change. Because, I was told a couple of days ago that, they're not going to come back. Their mind's kind of made up. But, like, the pull of the team and, what Ohio State could accomplish definitely, I think, had an impact. These guys want to play. Wyatt Davis has basically said on Twitter that he's going to be back if he can be back, which he hadn't signed an agent, so I don't think that'll be a problem. Sean Wade, I mean, it seems like all indications are he probably will return. Both of them are really important in Ohio State season. I mean, both would be first-round draft picks, All-Americans. I think Sean Wade is way bigger in terms of Ohio State's national championship picture, though, just because they lost everyone else in their secondary last year. And if you kind of project forward and, Clemson, Alabama, Oklahoma, whoever they could potentially play in the playoff if they make it, are all going to be throwing the ball downfield. So you definitely, a first-round cornerback would be a pretty big weapon to have. And just I don't think things would bode very well for them, especially in a weird year where you're not going to have the normal amount of practice and reps and all that kind of stuff. So any experience helps immensely in this weird season.
Kyle, Ashley, thank you for joining us. Of course, there will be much more on these topics available. Both of them have written plenty of articles already on theblade.com, so make sure you check those out for in-depth coverage of the Big Ten returning.